Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of No One's a Critic. Hopefully, this time goes a little bit smoother than last time. If you watched the last episode, it was a little bit rough. We were getting kicked out. We had like a time limit on a recording software, so we were getting kicked out of that. We had to switch to Zoom. Our microphones weren't set up properly, so the audio was kind of rough. But hopefully, this one goes a little bit smoother. How you doing this week, Mac?
Doing well. I mentioned yesterday was my girlfriend and I's 5-year anniversary. We
Congratulations.
I had work. Thank you. I had to go out. I had to work yesterday, so we went out tonight. We got burgers and went bowling, and I kicked her ass. She talks a
Nice.
lot. Yeah, she talked a lot of shit, and she got fucking
That's what an
shown
alpha
up.
male does, dude. They assert their dominance over their women by kicking their ass at bowling.
Yeah, fucking simps are like, well, shouldn't you let her win? I'm like, no, I'm
This
not.
is what
No.
a sigma male like us do.
Yeah, when I play Connect Four with my little cousin, like, fuck her, she's going down. Like, I'm not gonna.
Smash that.
I feel like to let her win would be an insult.
Alpha males
That's
never back
actually
down ever in any
no,
circumstance. An alpha male is never allowed to back down.
and that's not good. It's not good for her. It's like,
No,
hey, welcome to the real world, Junior.
exactly.
I'm not gonna go easy on you. No one's gonna go easy on you. I don't care if you're 3
Oh,
years old. You're going down.
fuck yeah, bro. Hell yeah, dude.
Oh, and just a segue. I know you haven't. I know we talked about it because I brought up me and my girlfriend. We watched Succession. Um, Last Sunday's episode, which
Oh,
is
it's
episode.
everyone spoiled it for me. I saw everyone was like posting about it. And
I
I was like, well,
think
I guess that's it for I know what happens.
I think it is still, if I'm not mistaken.
The number one rated episode on television, right?
Yeah, it's a 10 out of 10, but there's only 2 episodes, which is this one and Ozymandias. However, Connor's Wedding currently has 18,000 votes, and Ozymandias I think has like 192,000.
Yeah. So,
So it's
but
not
it's
really,
new, you know.
yeah, it's not really fair to.
It'll pick up, but yeah, that doesn't bother me because I don't really care about spoilers because I'm more into like the journey of like, hey, like what led up to this? Like what's the experience of watching this? Like people way overblow spoilers even on my fucking videos. They're like, dude, you're talking about season 1 episode 3 of Breaking Bad and then you mentioned what happens in season 1 episode 5. Like have you really not seen it but you're watching this video? Like what the fuck?
I think, well, there's something to be said about. I mean, like there are some like big examples of there's the infamous Westworld where someone on Reddit, I guess, like figured out a twist that was going to happen in like season 2 or 3, so the writers actually changed it.
That's stupid.
I oppose this. I suppose this was before shooting began. I hope,
That's
unless they
stupid.
like actually went back and reshot.
That's a
But
terrible idea.
it that is people have talked about this, like how this like sort of like spoiler culture has sort of ruined storytelling, and to some extent I do agree. I do think like that's a perfect example. All this Marvel shit where it's like everything is like kept so hush hush and like, and then like, and then when it happens, the actual spoiler, it's like, well, whatever. And 9 times out of 10, like because a lot of like Marvel shit is based off of like existing comics, like the actual like big fans already kind of know, like, yeah,
Yeah.
this person's probably going to show up. They're probably going to go here with this. Um, yeah, there's always like this, like, and then like you said, there's like these idiots who were like, I can't believe you spoiled Citizen Kane for me. It's like, it came out in
I
1942, bro.
know. And that's the problem with the internet. And we talked about this during our like television episode, but the way we consume media now is so like disparate where it's like, yeah, you can just start Breaking Bad whenever you want. Like it used to be like when it was coming out on TV before the internet. If you didn't watch it, you're not going to see it, right? I mean, maybe later you get like a VHS or something, but that was rarer. So people were incentivized to be like, oh, I'm going to tune in as it's coming out. But nowadays you can be like what I'm doing with Succession, right? I'm gonna wait till it's all done, then I'm gonna go through the whole show. But in another lifetime, you would have been like, nope. If you didn't see it, you know, you're left out, and the world moves on. But now people are like demanding that, like, no, the world stops with me. Like, if I have not seen it, if I'm planning on watching it later, you do not fucking talk about it. You don't spoil it for me. And I'm like, that's just not the way society works.
Yeah, well, on some point, it's like one of the reasons spoilers was um there's actually a Twitter account. It's called No Context Succession, and they post like Succession memes. And they got shit on because um a couple of days ago they posted something from the latest episode, but it was like this was like Wednesday. So this is like 72 hours after the audio after
That's
the
a
show.
little shadier when it's like when it's literally right happening. Then like you might be watching it the next day or something. It's like,
Well,
but, but if it came
well, no,
out
this
like a
was
year ago,
well, even this was 72 hours after the episode aired, so like 3 days. Yeah, so in that case, it's like people were giving the account shit, and first of all, the account was like, well, first of all, this is like this, if you followed this account that what I post you know it's like going to like a film reviewer like, oh, I can't believe you reviewed this film and I haven't seen it yet. Then why'd you watch the fucking review? That bugs me a lot when when like especially like pre-reviews where they'll say like no spoil well they'll say like spoilers and people will still be like, oh my god. But yeah, it's like especially nowadays where you have HBO Max, they're all streaming apps. You have it right at your fingertips. I mean, I guess like people, you can be busy and like, oh, I can't get to it till like 4 or 5 days later. And it's like, well, okay, but stay offline. Like, I don't, yeah. If you have time to scroll Twitter and look at Succession memes and you didn't watch the episode, I don't know. Stop bitching about it.
I will say that some reviewers like to put the spoiler in the thumbnail or in the title of the video. They're like, Logan Roy died,
Oh
all
yeah,
caps question mark, and then it's like even if you didn't click on the video, you're like, well, fucking shit. And
yeah,
that's like me. People were like posting like, oh my god, I can't believe Logan Roy died, and I was like, okay, I guess I know he died now, even though I haven't
yeah.
seen the show.
And we'll make sure to put spoilers on this episode since you just spoiled it.
I guess, yeah. But
um, but
how
yeah.
did I spoil it? I didn't even see the episode yet. I'm literally just telling what other people have like said to me.
Oh, wait, what he does, and it's really well done. It's actually what's so funny about it is that it's so like when me and my girlfriend were watching it, we like, kind of didn't believe it. Like we literally thought it was bullshit. We were like, "What's going on? What? This isn't what's happening." And the fact that the show actually pulled the trigger, and it's so brilliant because it's one of those things where it's like it's the last thing you expected to happen, and yet after it happens, you're like, "Of course, this had to happen in the show." Because like the whole season, you think the season sets up as like, oh, finally, Logan's kids have finally turned against him and they're gonna join forces together and they're gonna beat him. But then you remember the show is called Succession. The dramatic question of the show is who is going to take the top spot at the company. So if they defeated Logan, it's like, okay, well, that doesn't really answer the question. But now that Logan's dead, now these three siblings who came together, now the tension is, oh shit, are they gonna fuck each other over? And it's like, it's so brilliant. It's like it's just the last thing you expect to happen, and now it opens up this with only 7 episodes left in the whole series. It opens up a massive just torrent of dramatic possibility. So kudos to the writers. I thought it was incredibly
I'm
well
gonna
done.
lose some of that when I watch it because some of it's the spoilers, but also just like when you watch a show after it's already ended, you have a grasp of like you understand structurally how the show is gonna
Hmm.
happen. I will say something for you who's gonna watch Avatar. Avatar has these moments of like intense like suspense of like, wait, what's gonna happen? But you watching it like on streaming services or whatever, you're gonna see that like, oh wait, there's 10 more episodes after this. So
Yeah.
you kind of get a sense that like, okay, it's not gonna end right here, even though it kind of seems like it could. And you that is something you lose when you watch something, when it's not coming out week over week. But a good story though will always rise past that. A good movie, a good show, whatever, even if it's spoiled for you, even whatever, the material will be so rich that it's rewarding in and of itself. I knew the ending of The Sopranos before I ever watched one episode. People talked about it, Family Guy joked about it. I knew what was going to happen. But it was okay because the show was just so amazing regardless of that ending. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that. I actually tend to like I actually am a proponent of what they call like water cooler television. Like
Yeah.
I was there for Game of Thrones, I was there for Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
I'm here for Succession. These are really fun. Like it's
Yeah.
really fun to like, especially online. Like obviously there are the cons, but one of the pros is me and my girlfriend, we'll watch Succession, and then we'll spend the next like half an hour to an hour not talking, just on our phones, sharing like memes of
Yeah,
people
yeah,
reacting, because it's fun. It's really fun to like watch it live and then be with other people like freaking out, like, oh my god.
yeah,
I did that back with for Game of Thrones, of course,
yeah.
that we would have like friends over, Breaking Bad, and I think that's a fun part of
That is true.
television. Yeah, that unfortunately, to some extent, well, I mean, I think like even today we still have it with like airing on HBO Max at 9.
Yeah.
Um, but however, like you said, I do in most cases after I know how the show, it can be a fun roller coaster ride.
Hmm.
Like there are some shows where it's either or. There are some shows where I really enjoyed it watching it through, but
Hmm.
then rewatching it, it loses a lot of its
Yeah.
magic because it's just you realize it's not well constructed. It's all kind
Yeah.
of like, for me, Lost was always a show like that where it
Yeah.
was more about I can't rewatch Lost because
Yeah.
it's just it's like a roller coaster ride,
Yeah.
but it's
Exactly.
like it's almost like it's a roller coaster ride where the hinge point is you not knowing the twists and turns. But then
Hmm.
if you do, it's just kind of like the show doesn't
Yeah.
really have that strong of a structure. It kind of like drops plot lines like a motherfucker. So
Yeah.
that's actually a show I think weakens on, say,
Yeah.
like a second watch, whereas something like Sopranos, Mr. Robot, that's another big
Yeah.
one. These are shows that improve as the more I watch them.
I was gonna say that there's sometimes where it's like it coming out week over week kind of hurts people's perceptions. Like we talked about the Fly episode of Breaking Bad, right? Where it's
Hmm.
like that episode was not as well received as it probably should have been. Probably because if this was the only episode you got for the week, you might feel kind of cheated of like, well, nothing happened really. But when you're watching it like as having the whole series available to you, you're like, oh wait, this is a really cool artistic episode that's taking a little bit of a break, but it's okay because we're going to jump right back in as soon as I click the next episode here. And that can affect people's perceptions. Wire is another show like that where it's like, yeah, if you watch the first few episodes, you might be like, I don't get what's happening, or this is slow, or it's not really engaging me. But when you have it all together all at once, it's like, oh my god, everything is so perfectly connected. So there's pros and cons with both methods, but I do like that community aspect because it's one of the few things that's like keeping us all in touch with each other is like, yeah, we're talking about Game of Thrones when it came out, or we're talking about this new show. It's like you're part of a community, which is more and more difficult to find nowadays.
I honestly sometimes I use it was funny, just the other day we were talking about how um I actually don't, I mean, you and I have talked about it, how the Breaking Bad fandom kind of pisses me off a lot, um which I don't really get with like Succession or Sopranos. Someone on Twitter mentioned something where the more like highbrow the show, where if it's something like The Sopranos or Succession, um the fan base ends to be like kind of goofier. They're just kind of like making memes and just having fun. But then when you get like the Breaking Bad fandom or something like that, it's like a bunch of like pseudo intellectual, like, no man, who are just dropping like the worst takes you ever heard. Especially like when it comes to like we've talked about like young men and their perception of Walt, and it's just like, oh my god, like you couldn't handle Sopranos. Like this is like too. I think this is like too like
You
mature for
get
you.
you get that a little bit with the Sopranos, right?
Little bit.
There's a vocal community that's like, yeah, Tony, yeah, fuck Carmela,
Yeah,
dumb
but
bitch.
I think significantly less so. I think the
Definitely
Sopranos crowd is
less.
like that. Or a perfect example is a lot of people mentioned how a character like Skylar gets a lot more hate than say like Carmela. Now,
Yeah,
granted, that could be for other reasons in terms of writing, but like there are plenty. I've ran into a lot of fans who are like, "How dare Carmela? Tony does so much for her," and I'm
yeah,
like, "What the fuck?"
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I think it is less so for The Sopranos. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, so the reason I bring this up is because I tend to use Fly as like a litmus test for
Hmm.
like Breaking Bad fans. If they give me their like, if give me your opinion on Fly, like, what do you think of the episode, and how they answer, I personally think tells me a lot about their perception of the show,
Yeah,
of what it means for the show. I actually think it's a very important episode. Not plot wise, not in
No.
terms of like the actual A to B, but it's a very, not only just in terms of theme and characterization and just like it's just a funny episode,
Yeah.
but I really think that is it's the episode that really drives home the idea that Walt is this person who is so desperate for control, and yet simultaneously he also has this side of him that almost embraces chaos.
Hmm.
Or it's almost like he wants to create the chaos so he can control it, or
Yeah.
like something like that.
Hmm.
And I think and you can kind of get that generally from the rest of the show, but I
Yeah.
think that episode is one of the deepest explorations of his psyche and how he sees the world and what he is, and kind of going, back to the ending about when he's like, I did it for me. I think
Yeah.
that episode is really about, it really shows you who Walt is,
Hmm.
what he's doing, like what really makes him tick and what he's
Yeah.
after, really deep down.
Yeah. And I could understand criticisms about that episode if it's like, you could argue that we could have gotten this information with plot too, right? Because the rest of the show does not make us often choose, right? There's a lot of plot stuff happening, but there's also a lot of great character stuff happening. And the reason they made this episode is because they ran out of budget. So you could argue it wasn't necessarily an artistic choice to do this; it was a monetary one.
Hmm.
But I still think that, like, again, if you get what this show's going for, you should at least have an appreciation for it, even if it's not specifically to your taste. Like there's stuff about all these great shows that I'm like, I don't like it personally, but I understand the artistic vision and I can respect that at least. And that might be a great segue into our topic here, which is um, we started off talking about like what are we going to talk about this episode. And you'll remember last episode we said we were going to talk about dating next time, but we're going to put a pin in that for right now. We'll come back to it later because that would be controversial. But this time we're going to talk about critically acclaimed movies, shows, whatever that a lot of critics or a lot of audiences really like, but we don't like ourselves. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like the opposite of our guilty pleasure episode.
Yeah. Or generally just to kind of go off on that, or just like the idea of how does critical reception, whether positive, negative, how that ends up shifting certain elements. So for example, are certain films only heralded as masterpieces because critics say so? Conversely, are there films that, you know, today some people are like, actually they're a cult classic when they got panned, when they like, if they got panned, like got a lot of negative reception when they came out, are they only seen as a cult film today because of that? Like, are they actually a good film, or do people just kind of want to be contrarian? Um, or like, like the whole Rotten Tomatoes thing. It's like, well, critics gave it a bad score, so it's got to be. Um, I hate that so much because it's like, if the critics give it a bad score, then the person who likes the movie will be like, well, critics are out of touch. If the critics give it a good score, they'll be like, see, they got it right. And it's like, that's such a there's no like system here, guys.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I one example that comes to mind immediately for me is the film Bridge Over the River Kwai.
Hmm.
That's actually one of the first reviews I ever made was of that movie when I was first getting started, and that's a really critically acclaimed movie with a lot of star power. Very well received. But watching it, I was like, oh, I think this film has a lot of flaws. Like, I don't think it's like coming across the right way at all for me. Um, I mean, the movie's about this British platoon that's captured by the Japanese in World War II and forced to build a bridge. They there's this question of like, are they cooperating with the Japanese? Like, are they like going over to their side? Is their honor kind of blinding them to the harm of working with the Japanese? And there's a lot of reasons why I think it turned out that way. The source material was written by a French man who was kind of trying to write the British in a bad light. The director had a different vision than the actor Alec Guinness, who plays the main character in that. There's this like goofy side plot with this American soldier that I thought distracted from the tone. So even though I did respect the film, I was like, okay, this is really well made. I felt that there was a lot of clashing elements to that film, and I walked away from it kind of being like, I don't know if this is as this isn't the 10 out of 10 that a lot of critics are kind of making it out to be.
Hmm. And again, context is important. It's like, well, this was a film that came out in 57, so that something like Citizen Kane, when we're talking about Citizen Kane, is a great movie, but also you have to put it in the context of how what's the word I'm looking for, how influential it was, how groundbreaking it was. Which I mean, again, it's a great movie. Even today, it's gorgeous film, still pretty innovative. But when we're talking about like greatest quote unquote films, that's something to really
Yeah, Citizen
keep in
Kane's
mind.
become like a meme where it's like it was so touted by critics that now it's cool to hate it, right? To be like, I don't like
Yeah.
Citizen Kane. Like, I have way deeper taste than just reading the top 100 films and saying, Citizen Kane is my favorite. And there's people who do that too. There's an episode of The Sopranos where the women they're trying to educate themselves and be like cultured, and so they're watching the top
Oh yeah.
greatest films, and they watch Citizen Kane and they're bored out of their minds by it, and it's like, yeah, I agree. It's like sometimes something can be really critically acclaimed, but it's just not right to your taste.
I feel that way about a lot of Tarkovsky's work. I love Tarkovsky. He's a Russian film director. He's on Stalker, Solaris, um, but it really depends on the movie. Like Stalker, I love. Solaris, I love. But then he'll do something like The Mirror, which many herald is like his masterpiece. It's kind of like, it's almost like a good way to put it. It's like, it's almost like a poetry film. Um, and it's gorgeous, but it's also just kind of like, I think it's just kind of pretentious. Like, it's not a film that I would like, oh man, I can't wait to sit down and like watch this, bro. And oh yeah, it's just, it gets to the point where it's like, like, are people just like jerking this film off? Like, there's no narrative to it, and there wasn't supposed to be. Like, that's sort of the point. It's like sort of like a stream of consciousness film. But at what point is it like, are critics just kind of like, if like most people would watch this and kind of be like, I'm kind of bored by this. There's like no structure, there's no story, and like critics are like, no man, that's why it's good. And it's like, is that really why it's good, or do you just? And it's kind of hard to parse that out. It's got like very similar to like modern art, where it's like, oh, this is a great piece, and it's like, why? Like, can you actually like describe why it is, or is it just all open to interpretation? And you could say it's like, well, all art is. It's like, I think there are degrees though.
Well, here's
I
the
think
thing
there are
too,
degrees,
and
but
I think some people are scared to admit stuff. As like some people in the art like community are kind of scared to admit stuff like this because they don't want to sound like a pleb. But like, it's okay to be like, I respect the art that went into this, but I just I wasn't that into it, right? Like, I love Hitchcock, for example, right? Rear Window is one of my favorite films of all time. But there's sometimes I watch some of his movies and I'm just kind of bored when I'm watching this. I watched North by Northwest and I was like, I was like getting on my phone. I was like, this isn't that interesting to me.
I think that was one. Funny you mention it. I think that was one where even some like, I forget, it was like a respected critic who was like, "Yeah, I hate that fucking movie."
Yeah, and it's like I respect, like, I get what he's doing here. I get for the time this is impressive, and I respect the artistry behind it, and I respect him as a director. But it's just like not every single thing is like a knockout for me, and I don't even derange it. Like, if people love that movie, I say I understand why. It's just for me that one didn't appeal to me, or it's okay to admit that Hitchcock can be kind of boring nowadays by modern movie standards. I can still appreciate him and his contribution to the medium. And depending on it, on my mood, I might be in the mood to watch some older, kind of slower films. But the artist community has this really kind of pretentious need to be like, yeah, I watched Empire straight through, the Andy Warhol movie, which is an 8 hour shot of the Empire State Building. I didn't fast forward once. That's how cultured and fucking smart I am. And it's
Get
like,
fucked.
shut the fuck up.
Please tell me that's a meme and you haven't heard anyone actually say that.
I mean, I probably not really, but I'm
Okay,
using it
good.
as an example of like, you know, that type where it's like, yeah, I love the slow, boring films, and I watch them every single night without fast forwarding through it or getting on my phone or whatever, and it's like, yeah, you're real cool, man.
I that's the sort of shit, like that's a whole other like that's a whole other thing where like avant garde cinema. It's like, how did it make you feel? And it's like, and like there are some arguments where like films like Le Chien Andalou, like, you know, there are certain films that, like, I get that where they're trying to elicit emotions, but like something like Empire, like, yeah, like for those who don't know, it's like a, what is it, a 12-hour film? It's
It's just
oh
a
no,
single shot of the Empire State Building.
it's an 8-hour film. It's just a still shot of the Empire State Building overnight. Um, and yeah, that's like where it's like, okay, and then someone will be like, but did the film bore you? And it's like, well, yeah. It's like, oh, so it had an emotional effect on you. Get fucked. No, no, stop it.
While we're on
I
this
hate
topic,
that.
I want to bring something up, which is another thing I don't like about the film community, the film bro community. I don't like the commodification of watching films. Like, and I some things like Letterbox are kind of guilty like of pushing this, which is like people like try to watch like all these critically acclaimed films or whatever, not necessarily out of a desire to be like, oh, I'm trying to enjoy the film, or even that I'm trying to educate myself or whatever. It's to put it on a list on Letterbox that I watched every single Akira Kurosawa film. It's like an achievement to them that that's not an achievement for the sake of like, oh, I'm learning about Akira Kurosawa or I'm learning about the film history or whatever. It's just the fact. It's like Facebook, right? You're trying to get as many friends as possible. You're not trying to have deep friendships. You're just trying to you're commodifying it. You're trying to get as many as you can so you can show it off to other people and look impressive. And I
Yeah,
really hate that attitude. And I fully admit that like I've not seen every single movie of every single critically acclaimed director or whatever, even like their main things. I've never seen Vertigo from Hitchcock because I'm not always trying to push myself to be like, I have to watch every single thing on the off chance that someone ever asks me about it. I tend to be like, oh, okay, if I'm going to watch something, it's because I'm invested. I really want to learn about it. And I want to rewatch it a bunch of times too, if it's something that's good. I've watched The Sopranos 100 fucking times rather than try to watch every single show that's out there. I want to have a deep understanding versus a wide understanding.
it's funny you mentioned Vertigo because I was going to bring that one up. It's so originally when it came out, Vertigo in '58, it got kind of like mixed to negative reception. People didn't vibe with it, but then later on, that's when there was like a critical evaluation.
Yeah.
It's funny, you actually see that, and kind of going back to the whole thing about critics, you see that a lot with a lot of like today like highly regarded films when they were
Mm-hmm.
released. Not always, but there are a number of films that when they were first released, they actually got a lot of polarizing reception. Raging
Oh, yeah.
Bull was a film. There were some critics who were like, "This is the greatest film ever," where others were like, "This is kind of crappy." Vertigo was one as well. I think no, not Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane was pretty well received.
The Big
Um,
Lebowski.
Big Lebowski. But what's funny is that with Vertigo, so you haven't seen Vertigo.
No.
Okay, it's kind of a goofy movie. The plot is kind of fucking weird. It's like really, it's almost like too ridiculous. Where you're like watching, and again, like something like Rear Window. I think why that movie works is like it. There's such a simplicity to it,
Yeah.
where it's okay. This is like it's very plausible. Like it has kind of like
Yeah.
a what's what I'm looking for a gimmick, but it works. It works
Yeah.
it well. And I guess like you could say like the Psycho is a bit camp, but I think that film kind of tried was purposely so. Even North by Northwest. Again, it's not one of my favorite Hitchcocks, but it is a film that I think like it kind of is playing into. It is kind of campy in a way. Vertigo is really weird, where it kind of is sort of taking itself. I mean, Hitchcock always did have a lot of camp, but this was a movie where once the plot, so there's like a whole like plot with Jimmy Stewart, and he's his friend asks him to trail his wife, and it's this whole thing. The Once the twist is revealed, and then like the second half of the film unfolds, it's almost like thinking back, it almost like breaks the film where you're just kind of like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. Like this plot's fucking ridiculous. Like it almost breaks your suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
And I almost wonder because again, Vertigo isn't just it's heralded. I think it actually beat out Citizen Kane on Sight and Sound's um, top 250, top whatever 100 films or something. That's another one where I'm kind of like, is this a thing where it's like this actually is like a heralding achievement, or is it
Yeah.
more of like, well, there are some critics who loved it and it kind of
Yeah.
caught on, and then other critics kind of said they liked it. I'm not saying it's a bad film,
No.
but you kind of have to ask yourself when you get like these greatest films of all time.
Yeah, I think that, Hitchcock especially, you can, if you want to be, reductionist, you can reduce his stuff to be like, oh, and the twist is this person's a murderer. Like, it's something like not really like shocking, even though that's what he's known for, right? Is like the shockingest things of all time in his films. A lot of like Alfred Hitchcock Presents is like that too, where it's like, oh, these two murderers are gonna kill these people, but they end up killing each other first. What a twist! And it's like, okay, I mean, it's not that like fucking spectacular of a thing, even by the standards of the era, right? People have been doing like shocking, weird twists to plots all the time. But when you take into account that, like, again, not everything is like a groundbreaking, like earth-shattering achievement in film, but it's pushing something forward, right? It's like it's building off of other stuff, and in turn other directors are coming in, seeing what they're doing here and being like, oh, that's cool. Even if it might not be the most original thing ever, it inspires new directors and new writers or whatever to continue on and build from there, and to build their own movies and stuff off of the accomplishments of what he did. So um not everything I think deserves the top 100, like this is the greatest film of all time spot that it was given. um but for the people who were inspired by that, that might be, that might be a really important thing to them. That's the thing that led them to what they ended up doing later on.
Yeah, and that's kind of why, like, when we're talking about like greatest films of all time, that's why influence is really important. Um, because like, yeah, there are a lot of like, films from like the 20s, 30s, and whatnot that, while they're great, while they're well done, especially for the time period, um, there are other films that have surpassed them. I think in terms of technical achievement and whatnot, or just storytelling in general. However, again, it's very important to put these films in context to think like, if I don't know if you saw it. It's been going around on Twitter. Have you seen the film Wings?
uh
It was 1927. It was the first Best Picture winner.
no, I haven't seen that one.
Um, so in one shot in the film, you can probably find it on Twitter or somewhere, like it floats around. There's this tracking shot where like the camera like zooms past like five different tables and then lands on the main character. And even watching it, again, even like watching it in a regular film, you'd be impressed. But like this was shot in like 1927, where like CGI wasn't a thing. I actually don't know how they shot it. It's like when you watch it, like you can't believe it. You're like, holy shit! It must have been like on a crane. I don't know, but it's incredibly impressive. Um, so yeah, I wanted to plug that. But yeah, it's when we're talking about influence, that's always interesting, and that's sort of why it's a lot of people are very hesitant about calling like recent films like, hey, it's one of the best movies I've ever seen. And if it just came out like 3 or 4 years ago, and it's like, well, let's hang on, because not to say it's a bad movie, but when we're talking about like the greatest films of all time, influence is such a big part of that, and it's kind of hard to tell a film's influence after, I don't know, like 5 years, even 10 years sometimes.
And this is a bigger problem. We've talked about this before, but the ranking of art is really stupid when you think about it. Like, when you look at the top 100 list of films, they're all great films. Are they really better than each other? Not really. Like, they're just different, and they're trying to accomplish different things, and they have different legacies. It's impossible to say it. And influence is something, but not all influence is good, right? We talked about that probably a few episodes back, but like, there's movies that create like a bad influence on the future of films that come out. Like the Marvel influence, that's been really awful as a moviegoer. Um, you might argue, a critic might argue something different, right? Maybe 100 years from now, they'll be studying this genre that we created of the superhero film, right, and being like, "Oh, isn't this incredible?" I mean, the same way that we look at something like Akira Kurosawa, right, inventing the genre of like the assembling the team, and we're like, oh, that's a really cool thing. At the time, maybe people were like, oh, this assembling the team trope is stupid. I'm tired of seeing this in fucking movies, right? I'm tired of seeing westerns inspired by samurai films that were inspired by even older westerns. It's like they might have been annoyed with that at the time, but we in the future might be as like academics were like, oh, that's so awesome, I want to study this. So it's impossible to say what any film's legacy is going to be, and I really I think debating and arguing like numerically what movie is better than another, I think is really stupid.
Well, it's difficult because this is why, and funny enough, going back to this the talk of Rotten Tomatoes, a lot of people don't understand that Rotten Tomatoes is an
Mm-hmm.
aggregation site, and a lot of people very similar to like Metacritic, and I think a lot of people don't understand what that means. So
Mm.
like, for example, I know there was a big hubbub when Get Out came out, and I think it was rated 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and everyone was like, "Oh my god, you're saying it's better than The Godfather, which only has like 98%?" But what they don't understand is like that's not how an aggregation site works.
Mm-hmm.
Rotten Tomatoes works as how many critics gave this film over 60%. I think it's
Yeah.
60% that makes something fresh. Like, okay, 100% of critics gave it over 60%. Okay, so it's 100% Rotten Tomatoes. But if you actually look at the site and go to the average rating, I think Get Out has like 8.3 and The Godfather has like 9.2. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, so that's a better barometer of what films are considered better. Rotten Tomatoes is kind of like a general gist of like, yeah, most people seem to like dig this movie.
Yeah.
It wasn't a very polarizing movie. Everyone kind of agreed it
Yeah.
was a good movie. Not necessarily it was like the best movie ever. Um, and then something like The Godfather, like, well, it has 98%. It's like, yeah, there's always like some like
Mm-hmm.
person who's like, and again, that goes back to contrarian. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's like someone who's like, Godfather's not a good movie, actually.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know. And that's actually, you brought up, this is kind of like a contentious topic when we're talking about. I've really sort of drifted away from the idea of objective film criticism. I think a lot of people who talk about that, I think they are usually in their sort of like their own sort of like bubbles. Like it kind of becomes more of a, and it's funny too because I think there's actually a lot of groupthink in those communities where
Mm-hmm.
they like, this is a bad movie, and then everyone agrees it's a bad movie, and then they
Yeah.
find flaws in it. And then there are other movies that have those flaws, but if we agree it's a good movie, we're going to ignore them.
Yeah.
Um, Something that drives me nuts is that, and again, something like like the AFI or sorry, no, like Sight and Sound. That's also aggregation. They ask filmmakers and actors and whatnot to list their top 10 favorite films, and then they just see which ones pop up the most. They don't
Yeah.
actually say like, so what's like the best film ever. It's like that's not how it works, because that's really the only way you can make a list
Yeah.
like that. Um, because like for example, if we're talking about what's a better movie, The Godfather or Lawrence of Arabia. And it's like I don't know. Like
Yeah.
what are we even
What are we
comparing?
judging it on?
What's better, Goodfellas or There Will Be Blood? I don't like what are we comparing here? Like what are we? I hate when people do that sort of like
Mm-hmm.
stupid shit where it's like or like Blade Runner versus Andrei Rublev. Like what? Like what are we even talking about? Um, yeah, I think that's sort of like film criticism, like where you're trying to like rank them. Um, is kind of silly. However, on the other hand, I do hate the other side, and we were kind of mentioning it before about sort of, subjective film criticism about. So, for example, I don't think it should be a controversial statement to say that I think The Godfather is better than Scary Movie 2. I don't think that should be a controversial statement. But there might be some who would say it's like, well, all art's subjective, so
Yeah.
all that means The Godfather isn't technically a better movie objectively. It just means that the vast majority of people prefer it over this one.
I'm
And it's
really glad
like,
you brought up that specific example too, because I wanted to bring this up. My wife, who and I've never mentioned this on the podcast before, but I'm married. I brought it up on a stream a little while back. My wife, she does not like the kind of the critically acclaimed kind of shit that like we talk about in this podcast, right? She likes fun kind of movies. She likes the blockbusters, the whatever. She's into having like she just wants a simple fucking entertainment. And if you put a choice to her, would you rather watch The Godfather or Scary Movie 2? She'd pick Scary Movie 2. She loves the scary movies.
well, on that thing, it's like if you ask me on any given night, I probably would pick Scary Movie too. But that's because when me and my girlfriend are hanging out, we usually like to just kick back and watch a shitty rom com and not think about it.
But
However,
that
if
brings up
I'm
the question of like what does it matter though, like in terms of like saying that The Godfather is a better artistic movie. What does that matter? What does that change about anything to the person who enjoys watching scary movie? I don't think it makes a difference.
well, I think it makes a difference in regard to, because again, when we're trying to because I mean, a perfect example is for you and me, what we do, or at least for me mostly for in terms of writing, when we're trying to describe what is good writing, how do I, because so for example, a lot of people pointed out that or one of the defenses of Game of Thrones season 8 was that it was actually well written, you just didn't like it, or it just didn't do the thing that you wanted to. And it's no, there are some we can actually point to actual tangible things of where we're talking about character incongruence, we're talking about, character whiplash, things like that. But then again, you could now someone could come in and argue it's well, just because a character does something completely different than everything they've done up to that until that point, that doesn't mean it's badly written. But then the question is okay, then how do we decide on what is good writing? How do we decide on what is considered good character work or bad? And how do I, if I, how would I teach, how would I review someone's work? It's because they could just make crazy shit happen. I'm hey, it's art. And I'm yeah, but
Well,
I don't know.
it comes down to your personal subjective opinion too, and I think that's the benefit of like as being a critic. And sorry if you can hear the noise coming through. There's a motorcycle running
Oh, you're
nearby.
good.
But that's why I think it's so important to like when you're getting a review of something from a critic, it's important to know that critic and know like, okay, if I'm watching a macabre storytelling thing, I know you, I know what you like and what you don't like, and therefore I've seen other stuff you reviewed, and therefore your review on this is either it aligns with me because we share similar kind of ideals about what we want in our storytelling versus another critic's gonna have a completely different thing. And that's why I think the problem with stuff like Rotten Tomatoes is you're right, it's an aggregate score. You have no idea who these people who are reviewing it are. Like, what are their tastes? What are they looking for? A big thing recently was the Super Mario Brothers movie, which got I think bad critic scores, but the audience scores were really great, and people were like, "Well, look, this is an example of how broken the system is, right? Where the critics hated it because it wasn't telling a complicated story, it wasn't really telling any it wasn't really there's not really characters in it either. It's just kind of a fun, goofy little movie that's it has a plot, but like no character whatsoever. Like there no characters grow or change at all over the course of the story. Just fun, goofy stuff happens. There's some lighthearted action, and the movie ends. And I watched it recently, and I thought it was a very cute movie. Um, as a critic, like I could point out like, hey, Mario doesn't change at all in this movie. He doesn't go from one place to another. There's no hero's journey. Um, but that would reflect what I'm looking for in a film versus what the average moviegoer who's watching that doesn't really give a shit about that. So I think that the context of the person giving the review is important, and I think that's what a lot of people look for. Even the people that you know you might have problems with or I might have problems with. I don't like how they review films. I don't like how they make it like a culture war thing, right? The people who are into that, they're looking for that and they're looking for someone who agrees with them generally and they
Oh
want to
God,
hear their takes
you
versus
just
someone
reminded
else
me.
who they don't want to hear from.
You just reminded me that the Marvels trailer came out, and I just saw on my YouTube feed, I saw a shit. And these are people I'm not subscribed to. I believe me, and they're all just thumbnails of Brie Larson, oh, bro, the Marvels. I'm oh my god, what year is it, bro? When did Captain Marvel come out? Holy shit.
And
Um,
again, that they appeal to those people who agree with them and they want to hear from them versus like those people are not going to go to like a Lindsay Ellis video to hear what she has to say because they don't like the things that she likes. And you can argue back and forth about those people, but the fact is that like not every review, no matter how objective it tries to be, is worthwhile to people just because they don't like the same kind of things as the critic does. So what you value in storytelling, they might not value. So it's that's what I think the value is in being a critic, is having that relationship with your audience and like that kind of common understanding.
Brain dead incels, pretty for the most part for them.
I guess. I guess.
Um, it's hard because like on one hand, I completely agree with you, and I think you make a strong case about like subjective, but then on the other, I'm like, there's got to be something because again, like something that's like a key that is a key um example that I use is the Game of Thrones ending, where
Yeah.
like this wasn't a thing where like no, almost the majority of people had a very similar reaction to it, and they
Hmm.
could kind of pinpoint even. And again, this is something where like even people who were not well versed in like they're not talking about like they're not using the words like character arc or character development, yada yada yada. These aren't people who were like seasoned in it, but they could feel something was wrong. They were like, this didn't
Yeah.
make any. Wait, why did that person do that? That wait, hang on. It was such a jarring thing that so many people were like, wait a minute. And for me, that, and again, on one hand, I do think like objectively, the argument is like, well, all art is subjective. All these people just felt that same way
Yeah.
about this, and but then it's like, well, but why did like 95, if not
Yeah.
more, percent of people feel this way about this?
And I'm not saying
And
you can't, have like those criticisms. I think that is absolutely valid. And you're right. A lot of people felt that way.
But I mean, but I just mean like the point I'm getting at is like it seems like there's when we're talking about this, it seems like there's something else going. There's something tangible there where it's like
There
we're
is something
latching on to.
tangible. I'm not disagreeing with you that storytelling has certain, not rules per se, but ways of doing it. And if you break them without any kind of purpose, the end result's going to be worse for most people. My only argument against that was just that, like, if you liked the ending of Game of Thrones, that's fine. It's like that's your choice. Like, there's no, to imply that there's an objective thing would imply that you're wrong for enjoying it, and that's the thing I was saying against. It's like, if you liked any of Game of Thrones, good for you. I salute, and I'm not out here to convince you. But a lot of people that we talked about before those critics are absolutely trying to convince you that you're wrong for liking this. And this is a slight off tangent, but I got invited to this Discord for other
Uh oh,
YouTubers.
that's always it's
Um,
always a
it's
bad
a
beginning to a
you know
story.
where a story like this is going. And it was of a certain persuasion, where the words problematic and triggered are used unironically. And they were having a discussion actually about Psycho, by the way.
Wait, which one? Because usually those would be two different audiences, right? Because like that's like problematic is something like pussy liberals say, and triggered something like conservatives say, right?
No, pussy liberals say it too. Everyone says it now, but
Okay.
regardless,
Oh, like I got it triggered me.
it triggered
Okay, I
me. Yeah,
see.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So, they were having a discussion about, someone brought up that they thought Psycho was a really good movie, and someone was like, "Well, you actually shouldn't be watching that movie because it's very problematic for its representation of blah 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 blah."
Wait, was
And they
it?
were like,
What was the reason they
the
gave
the
for that?
the the Patrick Bateman is like it's portraying trans people or cross dressers in a bad light. They're crazy, like misinformation. Like, again, I'm not trying to argue for or against their point. I'm just saying they brought that shit up, and it made me really angry because they're like, you shouldn't watch Hitchcock. Like, he's a bad person for doing that. You should. And I was like, I was really gonna argue with them, but I made the adult decision to just be like, you know what? I'm just gonna walk away. Like, I'm not gonna get into a fight. This is their community here. If they want to believe that stuff, that's fine. And that's what makes me so mad about this culture war stuff, is that, like, you don't have to get into fights with people. Like, if people don't believe what you believe, like, don't feel the need to fucking start a fight with them. Just go do your own thing somewhere else. Like, there's no reason to. If they came into my space, right, and they were starting that shit, I would have been like, fuck off. But I'm not gonna go. I'm not gonna get invited to their space and then start a fight. But a lot of people don't feel that way, and that's what's really annoying about the culture wars. Everyone feels they have to like make a stand and fight each other over these stupid fucking movies and shows. The Super Mario movie was like that too. I saw people arguing for or against. It's like, this movie is bad because Peach is like a girl boss and it's like feminist propaganda bullshit, blah blah blah. And I saw other people who were like, the film has no LGBTQ whatever people in it. It's bad because of that. And I was just like, shut the fuck up. You're ruining
Well,
this movie. I'm just trying to enjoy it.
well, for the Psycho example, that's a point where I think you can kind of both, where you can simultaneously say, "Hey, Psycho is not a good representation of." I actually don't think Psycho is the best example. I think Silence of the Lambs is usually like the go-to. That's a film where, well, funny enough, in Silence of the Lambs, they actually state like straight up. Um, Hannibal Lecter literally states straight up that the killer, even though he wants to kidnap, spoilers for Silence of the Lambs, that he wants to kidnap women and take their skin and make a woman soup because he wants to be a woman himself. Hannibal Lecter straight up says that, like, no, he's actually not trans. He literally is not trans. However, it is a film that, like, wasn't very good in terms of the public perception of transgender people in general. However, you can simultaneously say, or same with Psycho, you can simultaneously say, "Hey, this film had a certain effect on the culture. This is how the film sort of fits into the cultural zeitgeist of the time." But not, but then if you say something like, "Well, it's a bad movie because of it," it's like that doesn't make any sense, because there's a lot of movies that I made a video on cruising. It's for sort of a similar thing where it's like the cultural context of the movie was like not good. It was portraying it, the way it portrayed gay people at a time when like gay people were still seen as like pedophiles and like deviants, and like, and it was right on the cusp of the AIDS crisis. I'm not saying the movie like was like responsible for it, but like it echoed a lot of very poor sentiments at the time. But I would never say the movie's bad because of it. What I would
Mhm.
say is that the movie's bad for other reasons.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's weird when people say it's like it, because like again, there are plenty of, like, even Gone with the Wind, like there's some like weird shit in that movie too.
Oh
But
yeah.
like you have to understand the context of when it was
Yeah.
made.
I think that's the big thing. It's like, I mean, it's one thing if you can prove that, like, oh, this director was intentionally trying to do something here of presenting a bad image. But for most of this, like, problematic bullshit people always talk about, it's not that Hitchcock was out to make, trans people look bad in that movie. I doubt that even entered his mind. He was just like, oh, wouldn't this be a twist if he's like channeling his fucking mother and he dresses up in her clothes and shit? Like, that would just be freaky.
Well,
Like,
that's
I
why it's a
doubt he gave
weird
us a shit about this.
that's kind of why it's a weird example where it's like, I guess you could put, like, that's why I think Silence of the Lambs or Dress to Kill, Brian De Palma's film in the 80s, those are films where like the topic of like transsexualism or transgenderism are like actually brought up. So I think those are a bit better case, especially Dress to Kill. That movie's weird. But Psycho, I don't even think it has nothing to do with being trans or like even cross dressing. It's that because his mother was so abusive towards him, he kind of it's like the implication is like he almost like constantly has the voice in his head, and it kind of like he acts upon that as alternate personality. So that's kind of like that. I always hate it when people use that example, because it's like, again, like I'm sure there are idiots out there who like watch it and it's like, oh yeah, like, trans people are weird, but like that's not what even the film was.
But that's not what they're interested in. They're just looking for
Yeah.
a reason to hate the film, and they're looking for any justification for their beliefs, and any kind of anything that's not like objectively praising in their mind is like negative because it doesn't reinforce their narrative. So it's bullshit. That's part of this whole culture war discussion of art that we've been over this many times. I absolutely hate it as a critic. It's not something I want to participate in at all. Like I said, it made me like hate almost going to see the Mario movie just because it's like people are fighting over the stupidest fucking shit, and it doesn't show any signs of stopping anytime soon. I was hoping we would grow out of it eventually. Like it's been a few years now, but no, man, it's like it's as worse as ever, and it looks like it's going to continue on for a long time.
I think people. I mean, I guess some. I think some people are trying to like. It just that just made me remind me of There was an A24 film that came out and had a great cast. It had Richard Jenkins, Amy Beanie Feldstein, Stephen Yun, and it looked really cool. But then Amy Schumer was in it too, and there were so many comments where they're like, "Oh, I'm not watching this movie. It's a bad movie because Amy Schumer." It's like Amy Schumer and Brie Larson are like the boogeyman of so many people, and I'm just like, this is like fucking weird,
Well,
bro. Like,
here's the thing about this whole like negativity towards like girl boss now. It's like it's feminist propaganda or whatever. And I was like, dude, movies have been showing like women being absurdly powerful forever, like since the 90s and even earlier than that. How many cartoons back in the day was the girl character the strongest one, even though people love to point that out, right? Where it's like, well, there's no way a little girl could ever beat up a man or whatever. And it's like, of course not. It's a fucking cartoon or a fucking movie or whatever. And a lot of shows showed the girl being the strongest one out of them all. And no one had a problem with it back in the day, but people nowadays are like, oh, it's not realistic. It's feminist propaganda or whatever. And I'm like,
well, it's a lot of
why are we
project.
fucking arguing over kids movies?
It's a lot of projection. It's like a lot of like I'm trying to think of what it's called. I don't remember what it's called. It's sort of the same. It's a sort of cognitive bias where it's like it's similar to when people complain about these are like fucking these are like weird people when they people who complain about how come there's no like white couples in commercials anymore, how come they're all like mixed race and stuff. And the issue with that is, well, one, you're not watching all commercials. Like there's like millions of ads per year, so this idea that like it's a majority mixed race, like that doesn't make any sense. But two, oh, it's the same phenomenon as like, how red cars get pulled over more. It's when something is normalized in your brain, you usually don't see it. It's so like, for example, if I'm watching like a commercial break and there's 10 commercials and 7 out of 10 have white couples and 3 out of 10 have mixed race couples, a person who has conditioned themselves to like see that, to like look for that, they might count the 3 mixed race couples, but then the other 7 of white couples, they just kind of don't think about, or they just kind of don't register. So in their perception, they're like, oh, actually, this is like, whoa, man, like all the commercials. That's kind of how I feel a lot with like this girl boss shit, where people have conditioned themselves to look out for this like feminist propaganda. So now every time a new movie comes out, like I think people point out like the reason they thought Peach was a girl boss was because, oh, look, she's like jumping on the boxes and the enemies and stuff, but Mario does that. And actual Mario fans had to come out and say Peach has been a playable character in these games since like the 80s, maybe even before that. Um so like that's an example of where it's just like you're just trying, you've conditioned yourself so much to look for the stuff that you see it everywhere. Or if like, oh, if a woman is competent in something, whoa, man, that's fucking. Or like Mad Max Fury Road got shit on that for when it first came out. People were like, oh, is it feminist propaganda? It's like, holy shit, guys.
I will say that, like, there are some examples where, yeah, they are pushing this, like, you can tell for a certain reason. But the Mario movie annoyed me really because if you watch the film, there's no girl boss element. Like, yeah, she's strong or whatever, but there's no pushing that, like, women are better than men or men should be subservient to women. There's nothing like that at all in the film in any kind of way. But people, again, this whole culture where it's made people argue about every single little thing. It's really fucking annoying.
My favorite is what was that line from Avengers Infinity War where they're doing something with Vision, and Bruce Banner is like, yeah, we tried to do this, but we couldn't. And then Shuri is like,
Oh
why
yeah,
didn't you
yeah,
just
yeah,
do this? And then it's just played as like a little gag. And
yeah,
even today, I hear people like, I can't believe that they're undermining the male character to prop up the black. And it's like,
yeah,
guys, you need to chill. Like, and then like, of course, everything else in the movie is like all the male characters are like powerful
yeah.
and they're kicking ass. It's like it's very selective. It's very like they're very
Mm-hmm.
trigger happy of like they see something or like, no, you understand. It's a larger
Yeah,
trend. And it's like,
yeah,
bro, you need therapy. Like this is getting
yeah,
kind of weird. Or even
yeah,
even The Last of Us, I get that a lot where I'm like, I had my problems with it, but like, holy shit, guys, you're making me like I don't even want to I don't even want to like interact with you because you're
yeah.
so toxic when it comes to this shit.
And if you don't like it or whatever, because some of them do push certain narratives, right? And if you don't like it, just ignore it. Why do we have to go to war over every single fucking little thing nowadays? Like, if I don't like something, I just won't watch it, or won't like argue about it. I'll just watch something I like. I'll talk about something I like. It's really aggravating to be a part of the culture right now, especially as a critic. It's like everyone wants you to be on one side or the other. And I don't know, I've gone on and on about this like in many episodes. It's just I really hope we get to the point one day where we can just enjoy things again and not have to make every single thing part of a larger war that we're fighting.
It's I almost wish I didn't have principles, because I kind of wish I could just make like cringy react content on YouTube, because you can make a killing doing that, like culture war shit. Oh my god! Although I have seen, I mean, I don't know how much of it. I definitely have seen a trend towards like away from it. Like there are a lot of like culture war channels that were big like even a couple years ago that have dwindled out, because I think a lot of people are sick of it. They still have their hubs. There are still people out there, but I have seen it kind of dwindle down, where people are just kind of getting like this movie where a Geeks and Gamers was like Shang-Chi's gonna fail because it's woke, and his entire audience was like, bro, just shut the fuck up. Like, it's like getting like weird now. Like you're just like Asian people in the movie woke. It's like what? Like what are we? Like what does woke even mean now?
Yeah, and I mean I am hopeful a little bit because I have seen like it's calmed down on that front too, and also I think people are seeing the success of media that's not really trying to push a certain message, and I'm hopeful that more and more studios will be like, well, we don't actually have to put this kind of stuff in every single one of our movies. Like, there's no reason to. They did it thinking that like, oh, people will come watch this if we put something controversial in it. And that sometimes that works out, but a lot of times it doesn't. So we'll see how things shape up over the next few years.
Yeah, or the majority, or a lot of people. That was another thing where it's like a lot of people were talking about like Disney putting in like all the girl boss shit and all that stuff, and they were talking about it being it's like, oh well, they're trying to push an agenda, and it's like I almost wonder if it's like, is it they're trying to push an agenda, or they're trying to use it to kind of cover up like kind of poor writing, like it's like they'll know that like people get mad about this, and then we can use it to like hate on them. So it's almost like I almost think they're giving too much credit to these corporations, where they're like, yeah, they're trying to like give you an agenda and like lift women up over men. It's like I think these people are just incompetent, and
I
they're just
mean,
kind of like going by the
Disney
seat of their
has
pants.
the president of Disney has come out and said that they're like, no, we are absolutely pushing more inclusion of women and people of color and LGBTQ or whatever. And again, that's not I'm not saying that's a bad thing or not. Um, but I'm just saying that like I think the way they've gone about it has not been done well, and I think people's reaction to it has been really stupid too. Like the Little Mermaid is like there's no reason to fight over the fucking Little Mermaid. Who cares if Ariel's black? It doesn't make a difference. Like I'm not gonna watch it either way because I don't watch any of these live action Disney movies because they suck.
That's
But
actually
there's no need to fight over it.
that's just kind of like what's so funny, where it's like this is like the funniest part about like all like these React channels, where I'm actually picturing like on the opening night of Little Mermaid, half the audience is like little girls like going with their parents, yeah, yeah, and the other half is like 35-year-old dudes who all have like these React YouTube channels, seeing it like on opening night so they can get like they could get the review out there, and I'm just like, why, why are you watching the Little Mermaid movie? It's just
And
weird.
you're supporting it too. It's like even if you really don't like it and you don't like the messages they're putting out there, just don't support Disney. Don't go watch their shit. Don't subscribe to their stuff. I don't know. Maybe some of those people will pirate it, and in their mind that's like a victory because they're stealing money or
But
whatever. But you're still,
even
you're
say it,
still generating content for them.
you're spending time out of your day to do it too. Or like people who watch like there was some channel I used to watch. Well, I didn't used to watch, but I used to be I used to be knowledgeable of, who like he would do like episode by episode reviews of Batgirl or something, and I'm just like, bro, what do you like? Maybe like do the pilot, and it's like, yeah, this was like bad, but like episode to episode, and it's just like again, like the joke is like him just like sitting on like his couch like this, and his wife is like, "You're all right." It's like, "Yeah, I have to watch Batgirl. I have to watch this week." It's like I don't understand. I don't understand that pathology at all.
I think people would be a lot more happier if they just kind of focused on stuff that they liked and didn't feel the need to attack everything they didn't. But that's the age we live in right now. So
Except people who liked the ending of Game of Thrones.
yeah, fuck them.
Yeah, it's the one
They should
group.
fucking hang.
That's a bit extreme, but I'm not a fan of it.
Well, anyway, thank you guys for listening to our episode. This went smoother than last time now that we don't have to worry about getting kicked out. And stay tuned, yeah, for the next episode. No One's a Critic coming soon.
Take care, y'all.